to chat. So thanks for the invite.
Oh yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to get started about with you just telling us a little bit about what it is that you do.
Well, as you mentioned, I started out as a photographer and quickly transitioned into documentary filmmaking. And the filmmaking aspect, I probably would say, is 80% of what I do these days. It's, to be honest, it's the world of photography is getting harder and harder to make a living in, if I'm completely honest. And I've just kind of went down a road of, developing a passion very early for the filmmaking, and that's taken on, a kind of life of its own, taking on some wonderful adventures around the world. So, I spend probably half my time making natural history films, but then a lot of also science, nature, and kind of history programming as well.
So how did you switch from photography to documentary? Like, how does that happen?
Kind of a happy accident. I was very lucky. Straight out of college, I studied photography in college and thought I was going to become a sort of editorial photographer, probably working for a magazine or newspaper. And I was literally weeks out of college and visited a film production company in the UK, Oxford Scientific Films, that used to work as a slide library. So they'd sell images that I would take, and they needed an assistant for the summer, 6-week position, and in the film department. And 3 years later, I was still there, and that kind of did this amazing apprenticeship with the guys there, and I've never looked back.
I was also wondering, how did you get into photography just to begin with? Is it something you were into as a kid, or how that happened?
No, very, very much. Yeah, my father was a keen photographer, and he started me out very early. I think he would have loved to have been a photographer himself, but he probably took the much wiser move and became a very successful businessman, which might have been the smarter move for everybody, for me included. But I joke, he actually was very supportive, and bought me a camera very early, and supported me going through college to study photography. And that just was a great launch platform. And I say it was kind of from him, and then going to Oxford Scientific, and that was just a very lucky and fantastic opportunity as well, and had some great mentors there that really launched my career.
David, as with everything, oh, sorry, Kate.
No.
Technology is changing and has touched and changed our lives over the years. How has the advancement of digital photography and more access to cameras just in general changed your line of work?
The technology, absolutely has changed. The way we work hasn't changed a lot. It's funny, in some ways, you would think the digital world would have simplified things. Typically, if I'm on a film shoot, I'll have 8-10 cases of equipment that I'm checking in at the airports, and that really hasn't changed a lot from the film days. I'd say the image quality has. I was shooting on 16mm film to start with, and now it's I'm shooting with a 6K resolution camera, sometimes 8. So the quality of the imagery has certainly improved, and the versatility of what we can do with cameras has also changed. But I'd say overall the storytelling techniques and the way that we work has actually stayed surprisingly similar.
I was wondering, you said that your dad had sort of introduced you to it. So as you sort of progressed with photography, did you ever find yourself like showing him tricks or anything?
Sort of, yeah. I guess pretty much straight out of college, I was being mentored by these guys at Oxford Scientific, and they were really at the top of the level in terms of time lapse and slow motion and all kind of techniques that just somebody who's a keen amateur wouldn't be exposed to. So yeah, for sure at that point, there was technologies that I had access to that, you know, he didn't. And at that point, I would say as well, I mean, in a way, the technology has become much more accessible these days. So, you know, even with an iPhone these days, you can do beautiful slow motion video. 30 years ago, that would have taken a $30,000 camera to do the same thing. So, you know, those tools have become definitely a lot more available. And those days, it was just a very simple 35mm stills camera. And, you know, it doesn't get much more basic than that.
Now, I guess now with the digital technology being able to kind of review your shots a bit, do you feel a little bit more confident while you're, you know, out there taking shots, as opposed to back in the day when it was filmed? So it's just like, well, you know, let's see if I got the settings right. I know you can, you know, if something's in action, you only have that one, you know, that one chance. So that doesn't change. But then you can, if something's sitting still for you, you do have a time a little bit, I would assume, to sit there and edit.
Oh, for sure. And it is great. That is a huge advantage these days of trying different techniques, and just, yeah, instant gratification of being able to look at something and see whether it worked or not is fabulous. I guess in the old days, you just try, you know, bracket exposure and do a lot of different variations to make sure that something worked. Now, yeah, you can kind of figure it out quickly, and yeah, you can see right then and there, which is great.
This is kind of a two-parter with that. So with that ability to, you know, kind of almost get the shot then and there and know that it works, are you is the chain a little shorter with the people that you're working for? Say they're off-site somewhere, they're wanting updates constantly.
Yeah, it varies depending on the client, but often the last year, I'd say in particular, it's been almost like daily reports back to somebody that could be, like I was working for a client in Europe last year for most of the year, and it was like a daily report. I mean, I'll be honest, it's actually got more complicated because they'll want a shot-by-shot report of the video that we've taken, like the location, what was it, what was the subject, all the technical aspects of the shots. And you're not sending back, the technology is, you know, when you're looking at 6K video, for example, the files are so huge that you're not really sharing the imagery. Sometimes maybe a screen grab of the video, but not really the whole video, but definitely kind of having to report back. The old days, 20 years ago, I'd go and I made a film on polar bears in the Arctic for Geographic. I was away on that project for 2 years, and sometimes would go 3 months in the field without really talking to anybody.
Wow.
And you wouldn't, you know, and you'd have exposed film that would just, you'd keep safe, and you'd have no idea until you got back if that was, you know, did it work? And, or did somebody in customs fog the film or cook it in an X-ray machine?
Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
no.
Yeah. I did a shoot in Australia, and was going back to the UK to a client there. And I think somebody in customs, in those days, we had 16mm film and 400-foot reels in a metal can. And it was kept together with a piece of tape. And there's a black bag inside of that. And you'd have to open that inside either a dark room, or you'd have a changing bag to look at it. And to try and persuade somebody at customs to do that was hard. And then you'd have to explain how to do it. And yeah, I had somebody basically expose some very crucial film that was, that then they had to send out, commission a whole other shoot to somebody to go back and do it again. It's just what happens, unfortunately, sometimes. These days, much easier with hard drives, and I tend to at least have at least 2 copies of the footage, sometimes 3. So it's got to the point these days where we'll, I just did a shoot in Iceland, for example. So we had 3 copies of the footage. I brought 1 copy back with me, left 1 copy, well, 2 copies in Iceland with different people. And, you know, clients these days don't even want you to bring 2 copies back on the same flight, just in case something happened to the flight or a bag's lost. But it's, you know, but we take precautions so nothing can So, you know, I and the flight might be lost, but the backup footage would get back home somehow.
Did the footage make it?
Yeah.
This may be one of those questions where there isn't really an answer. I was just wondering if you had a preference for just going out and just taking shots of wildlife or making documentaries, or what you thought of that.
Yeah, two different things. I mean, in terms of still photography, that's more a case of, you know, you might be a little bit more loose in terms of, you know, going out to shoot something and not really having an end goal. But with the video, it tends to be more, there's a story in mind. So there's a structure and a story you're trying to tell. So kind of have two different approaches there. I tend not to just shoot video. Well, unless I see something really special, I tend not to just shoot anything or anything kind of thing. It generally is, there's a purpose or a plan to it. You know, we shoot terabytes of footage a day, so it tends to be that you kind of plan that out. So I kind of, if I'm not in a sort of more of a work mode, then I tend to flip over into taking photographs more than video, I guess. And kind of, that's where the kind of more creative side comes in, I think. And I like to take photographs most days just to kind of keep my eye in, and love doing it anyway. But I kind of use the photography, I guess, as just a way of staying connected with a camera and using it, and just say keeping my eye in and keeping fresh with techniques as well. So.
How has
you taken any? Oh, you go ahead, Ty.
Oh, sorry. How has the rise of video drones changed your work? You know, I would assume once where you needed to commission an entire helicopter or some sort of like bush plane, now you can just kind of get most of the shots you need.
It's crazy, yeah. I mean, we'd pay, you know, $2,000 an hour for a helicopter, and you can go out and buy a drone now that would shoot 4K video and do it beautifully. So you can buy a drone now for what we pay for an hour of helicopter rental a few years ago. So it's made it, again, very accessible. It's wonderful technology. I just did a shoot in Iceland that was mostly with drones, and the quality of the imagery and the way that you can access locations is incredible and opens up all sorts of creative avenues. I think it's also, I see this a lot with, you know, there's always that sort of trends, the drone as handheld gimbals as well, these sort of things, which are really great tools. They can also get a little bit overused. Mm-hmm. And I think people have to be a little bit conscious of that. The most important thing is storytelling. And if it's a really good tool to tell a story, then use it, and it's great. But people can kind of get sucked in a little bit by the technology and then overuse it. And I find, you know, if you look at, I often look at really well shot TV dramas as kind of an inspiration for how to shoot and how to frame. And you look at the way that drones are used in those situations, and actually the shots are quite simple, but very well thought out and very effective. It's not so sort of crazy pirouetting drone around something. It's generally just a big reveal or something. So it's like using it effectively and not getting too tied up in the sort of crazy moves that you can do. You know, think about the story and not the technology.
Yeah, I can see how that could take away from what you guys are trying to talk about. But, you know, it's like how many long tracking close-ups can you really fit into one documentary?
Yeah. It's, you know, and it is a fabulous tool. And I have seen a couple of films recently. I just saw one that was about reforesting Iceland. And it was basically an interview intercut with beautiful drone imagery. And that actually worked really well. But it was quite lyrical and quite smooth and sort of slow in its pacing. And that was great.
See. Looks like we may have a little lag on David's end.
Technology is turned on him.
Yeah, it heard him.
Yeah.
It heard what he was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's still in the chat. It's just his internet's taking a
Oh,
little
there
bit.
he is.
There we go.
Oh, maybe. Nope. There he is.
I lost you. When are we back online?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Well, we were just talking about how technology has failed us.
It heard you talking about it.
It must have. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
The technology police got me.
But you were saying how you had there was a project in Iceland, and that was like a good use of the drones there.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, it's a fabulous way of accessing a large area. You know, the range on a drone these days is incredible, and just the fact that you can take shots now that would have taken thousands of dollars to create it's a wonderful tool. Absolutely.
Mm.
So what might an average day look like if you're making a documentary? Is it set up in phases, or one day you're just setting everything or looking for where you're going to go, or how does that work?
It's hard to say. I mean, to take an example, the last shoot I did, which was this Iceland story, we tend to generally, you know, just as a photographer or as a filmmaker, the sort of golden hour of dawn and then also sunset are always kind of busy times generally. So I would say often it's sort of a crazy 3 hours first thing in the morning, and then later in the day and the middle of the day can be a little bit slower, and that's when you can be organizing and setting up things. But it depends very much on the story. You know, with wildlife, there tends to be sometimes days of waiting or looking, and then 20 minutes of absolute craziness when something happens. So it's quite variable. Depends on the subject matter, really.
So why wildlife? What got you focused on that subject?
I guess that was partly my dad's fault as well, probably. It's we just used to spend a lot of time outside, and I spent a lot of time on a farm as a kid, and that kind of got me intrigued in the outdoors. I just always loved the outdoors, so it was kind of the perfect marriage. And I had that love and was very interested in landscape photography when I was at college, and I was very lucky when I got this job at Oxford Scientific, because at the time I couldn't quite figure out how am I going to make a living from photography and wildlife, and you know, it's just like seemed a very unusual mix, and there's very few people that were lucky enough to be able to combine those two, and I just happened into this job, and yeah, it was just, you know, say I've been very blessed and very lucky, so you know, that's been great, and I've you know, just was very inspired by, you know, early David Attenborough films, for example, Life on Earth and things like that, which kind of just got me hooked, I guess.
We actually have a question from Connie. It says, what was your most exciting wildlife encounter?
That's a hard one to choose. I mean, you know, I've certainly had some hairy moments, but I'd say the exciting things are when you're actually seeing something that's very rare. I was really lucky a few years ago to work with a bear biologist in northern Minnesota who'd habituated wild bears, so we could actually walk with them in the field every day. So I could be, for example, with a mother and cubs walking just a few feet from them all day. And we did that for months at a time. And even he had not seen some aspects of their behavior. And I think probably the key thing, I was just talking to him recently, one of the things we saw was family breakup. So you get these, so I was walking with a mother bear and 3 pretty much full grown cubs. So 4 bears sort of shoulder to shoulder, walking, you know, side by side, and then a male bear chasing off the cubs, and was right amongst all of that as it was happening, and that had never been filmed before. Biologists had never seen it. So it's moments like that which are just wonderful.
That sounds wild.
It was.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, good one. I'm just going to be slipping those in the entire time.
I was actually kind of curious, and you do all these wildlife documentaries and photography, and then switching gears and going into like the inside the Pentagon during 9/11. How does that change your workflow? Like, do you have steps that you take? Like, okay, I'm no longer out tracking mother bear, but now I'm inside in a
Right.
uptight room. Like, how does that change your storytelling and your photography and everything like that?
Obviously different techniques. And I think generally speaking, those type of projects are generally working with a producer or director. Pentagon was a perfect example of that. So I can, in those situations, with wildlife, you tend to be kind of a one-man band and you sort of directing, shooting, doing the audio, you're kind of out there by yourself. The subject kind of demands that. But whereas you step into something like that Pentagon story and then suddenly you're part of a 4 or 5 person crew. And at that point, then you can focus more on the camera work and you're not really so much in the decision-making processes of how the film's perhaps going to be put together. So it kind of frees you up to just, you as part of the crew, you suddenly become more focused on, your job and the delineation of that. Not that you don't all kind of, there's the fluid sort of process of, the technicalities sometimes dictate how you do the job or how you tell a story, but it's a shared process, I guess, in those other situations.
And we've got a question from Paige Havens, and she wanted to know what project in your career you're most proud of.
I've done quite a few stories about wildlife crime in the sense of, animal trafficking and kind of poaching, anti-poaching tech, which is obviously kind of the selling of animals in markets in China, for example, right now is obviously a very topical story. Mm-hmm. So I did do a lot of work in that area. It's now 20 years since I did that. And it's sort of sad to see that the situation hasn't changed. At the time, though, we did manage to get trade sanctions taken out against China at one point because of the footage we brought back from a project that was to do with the farming of black bears. But I've documented smuggling of ivory and rhino horn and illegal trade in whale meat in Japan. So it's kind of those. It's really felt like that's really made a big difference. Mm-hmm. It's great to get the story out, but they've actually also had real political changes have happened because of those films and the way that lobby groups have then been able to take that information and go to DC and then make real changes.
Yeah, that's really important work, and you're right. That's so relevant to everything that's going on right now.
Yeah. It's sad that it's work that just needs to continue, unfortunately. For very obviously, we're all learning exactly why at this point, and it's a market that needs to stop, and we need to work on that.
Yeah, I feel like that would make some people quite cross with you, to say the least, and trying to get out of certain countries with all of your footage. Has that ever been an issue?
It has, yes. Yeah. I've literally had small hard drives done the kind of crazy thing of cutting a bar of soap in half and putting a drive inside the middle of a bar of soap and sticking it back together and putting it in my luggage and taking like 4 different versions of the footage on different drives, sort of like on my body in a bag. And so absolutely, I probably shouldn't give any specifics because yes, I've been arrested and probably was a wanted man in a couple of countries a couple of times for the fact that we documented crimes. As an example, we documented the killing of sea turtles in Central America in a particular country. There's a turtle excluder device on shrimp nets, which stops sea turtles getting in and becoming drowned. And certain countries are everyone's meant to use them. In certain countries, they they get adapted so they're not effective. It looks like they're using them, but they're actually not. And we managed to sneak onto some boats to document that. And the US has trade sanctions against any country that isn't complying to that. And the local fisheries ministry found out what we were doing and knew what we had. So yes, made a very quick exit from that particular country and brought the footage back to DC very quickly.
So when you go on like vacation, for example, is it hard for you not to slip into photography mode? You go, okay, you know, hang on, honey, this is a really great shot. And she's like, not this again.
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible, if I'm honest. Yeah, it's pretty much impossible. I can't help it. And you know, I mean, the camera that we've all got right now in our pockets is the smartphone, and you know, I use it all the time. I can't help it. I'm completely addicted, I must admit. And but at the same time, it's kind of such a passion, and I think also I have just a need. It's sort of, I find if I don't do it, even after a few days of putting a camera down, I kind of lose the edge. So it's like you just got to keep doing it to kind of just keep in practice. That's my excuse anyway.
Do you have a favorite smartphone that has like a camera on it? Or this smartphone, the camera's better?
I've got an older iPhone. I have a 7, which I desperately need to update. And I tend to be, I don't do the kind of every time there's a new one, update it. So I have friends now with the 11 and the 11 Pro, which is amazing. And I've seen the results from that. So at some point, I think in the next year, I do need to upgrade to the 11. So that would be my phone of choice right now if I was to, you know, go out and buy a new phone. At the same time, the 7, although it's old, is still actually taking great pictures, and probably 90% of the pictures I put online are taken with that phone.
Wow.
But you've got me beat. I'm still using a 6. So you're more technologically advanced than someone.
Just only.
No, I don't know if I'm pointing to her, but yeah. What kind of guidance would you give for those interested in pursuing a career similar to yours? I know things have changed since you kind of worked your way up through, but now.
I mean, it's tough. Yeah, I wouldn't discourage anybody. And I think back to my dad and the way that he encouraged me. At the same time, other people had said, you know, there's very few people who make a living in this field. So it is competitive, and probably, you know, it is a limited number of people that can be successful. But that's no reason not, if you have a passion for it, not to pursue it. There are many more film schools now that specialize in this type of work, you know, particularly just in wildlife filmmaking. So probably that is a good start. At the same time, I'd also encourage people to, you know, find a mentor. That's what really kind of, I mean, I was very lucky in that I studied still photography and then went into filmmaking with a company that had some really great and very generous people. And I think the hands-on experience of actually working with somebody and alongside somebody on a shoot just is, you know, 10 times better than a classroom. I teach, so I shouldn't, you know, I'm not going to downplay that too much. And, you know, but so the college environment is very useful, but really being out there and being active is probably the key thing.
I was curious, do you have a favorite subject, like when shooting wildlife? Is there something where you really prefer working in a certain environment or with looking at a different animal or something?
Seems to go in phases, and I think probably if I could have a choice and just be, you know, yeah, just choose, you know, somebody said, here's some money, go and make the film that you want. Bears are the thing that I've done a lot of stuff with, so black bears, polar bears. So that probably, I did a polar bear film 20 years ago now that I would love to revisit. the Arctic has changed so much. And at that point, people were just starting to talk about climate change. Now, obviously, the Arctic is a very different place, or at least we're very aware of that. So that would probably be where I would, given free rein, that's where I'd go, and that's the story I'd probably tell.
And then I also wondered if there's a favorite location.
I think the Arctic is kind of calls me. It's funny, cold places, and the other place is the Falklands in South Georgia. The wildlife in the Antarctic is insane. South Georgia, which is famous for the whole sort of Shackleton story, is a very dramatic landscape, and you go to places like St. Andrews Bay, and there's the 300,000 king penguins on a beach with elephant seals and fur seals. It's just, so I think probably the polar regions that might seem to be a calling. I'm not sure why, but that's definitely, it's just, I'm fascinated by the wildlife and the places and stories and history. So that's kind of what calls to me.
And then I just wanted to ask you a little bit, just because I've heard so much about it from Connie Norman, about this this wildlife photography retreat you do at, is it Cumberland Island? Am I getting that right?
Yes, yeah. So each year we do kind of officially kind of one sort of, we call it the photo safari rather than a workshop. So we take groups around Cumberland Island based at Greyfield Inn. And it's part wildlife, part landscape. And it's less, so it's such a wonderful place that we don't really want to be inside and in a more of a classroom setting. So it tends to be more of a, island adventure. Try and teach people as you go, but do it out in the field as opposed to as a classroom setting. And then there's a second kind of wildlife weekend in the spring as well. So we did do a similar thing there. And it's, Cumberland is an amazing place and very accessible from the southeast. It's just such a wonderful wilderness area. Not quite as much wilderness as some people would have you believe. It's, there's a great history there as well, which is fabulous and another reason to visit. But it's a very wild and beautiful place. The wildlife spectacular, and very close and very easy to get to.
What kind
Making me jealous.
Yeah, right.
Next time.
Do you have any new projects coming down the pipeline or anything that you're excited about that's pending?
We kind of got some things in the pipeline, which kind of hoping to do, but kind of like everybody in the industry, like 2 months ago, every job was just canceled. I was fortunate. I was making a film for National Geographic in Iceland, and I think I was probably the last shoot to go out before they just shut everything down. Managed to just get it completed before they finally said, right, everybody needs to be home and safe at home. I'd hope to do some more on that. It's kind of a landscape celebration of iconic places. So hopefully there'll be some more of that coming down the pike, but it's hard to know. It's such an uncertain time. Same time, everyone's home watching Netflix and Amazon and all these things. So have a feeling that once the door opens again, the industry hopefully will get very busy because there's a great hunger for the content right now. But at the moment, everything is closed down.
I feel like landscape and nature documentaries are going to be in high demand after everybody's been locked inside their house for the last.
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think people will be surprised to learn about your job?
I don't know. It's weird, in a sense, it's so normal to me that I think, and then I do take, I sometimes take people out in the field and they're, I think, a little bit sort of mystified, kind of confused by the amount of time that it takes. Sometimes I think back to making a black bear film that we did, and I had a few people come out in the field with me, and they were just amazed at the hours that were put in of field work for the few minutes that you would get of footage. So it's sort of hard earned. So I'd say that really, it's just like it takes a lot of patience, and sometimes you'll have 5 minutes of wonderful footage for, a whole day's worth of looking and waiting. But that's just the way it is. And I often feel that like on the Cumberland trips too, if I take really like one really good photograph a day, I might actually shoot hundreds, but if I have one keeper at the end of the day, that's mission complete. That's perfect. That's great. So it's kind of like setting the expectations. And I guess I try and set the bar pretty high. So, but it's like, if I get that really one good photograph, done. That's great. Perfect.
And we actually have another question from Paige Havens. Have you been doing anything to document this time in history during the pandemic?
I must admit, not so much. I mean, I've sort of definitely been documenting the local area. I'm fortunate in that I live in, I'm spending time right now in Maine, on the coast of Maine, and it's a very kind of remote rural area. So blueberry farms around me that are just deserted, and I can walk straight from the house and walk for miles without seeing anybody. So I tend to be, try and get out for a hike when the weather's allowed, and definitely been enjoying kind of that. It's kind of a stark landscape, but I've been interested, it's been fun to kind of delve into that. And it's been wonderful because it's so quiet right now, and we normally on the flight path of all the flights coming in from Europe, coming into New York, there's not a contrail in the sky. It's just like these incredible skies that are clear of airplanes, and you really become aware of nature in a way because of the fact that you can hear so much because there's no vehicles, there's nobody moving around. So definitely it's allowed me to feel more connected with the place and really kind of immerse myself in it.
And you're saying that you take shots every day. I was just curious if you had one from this week where you were just like, ooh, that one's a nice one.
I mean, I do, and mostly with the iPhone, so it's not like they're super high quality, but, I do kind of put those on Instagram every day. And there's been some moments this week and I think it is partly because the place has been so quiet, the sky has been so beautiful on those clear days that it's a rare and special time to enjoy that. So it is a great time if you can get outside, which I know is not possible for a lot of people, particularly in urban areas. Perhaps there's less movement. I've been very lucky that I can walk right from the house and say walk into a remote and deserted area straight away. So I think those landscapes and just enjoying those amazing skies has been something special this last couple of weeks.
All right, guys, we are reaching the end of our time. So if you have any questions for Mr. Wright, please put it in the chat while you can. And I was just going to ask if you had anything coming up once. I know you're in Maine right now.
Yeah, got some things that I'm sort of planning, which I can't really talk too much about because it's sort of confidentiality thing of people I'm working with, but hopefully some more wildlife projects and sort of conservation stories that hopefully will develop in the next few months. But it's really so dependent on when our world allows us to travel. The idea of travel just seems such a luxury right now, and I've been very blessed to do a lot of it over the years, and looking forward to that. So it's let's just hope we get past all this very sooner rather than later. So.
Agreed. Well, Ty, do you have any last questions?
Yeah, I kind of do. And feel free not to answer this, but has there been a moment in your career when you got through, let's say, a shoot, and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to do that again because it's A, scary, B, dangerous, or
Yeah, there's definitely been that. I mean, I think probably over the years, the wildlife crime stories, we've often worked as an undercover team in that situation, and had. I remember being at a big time. I had another guy who was an investigator for a charity, and I was there kind of hired to do some shooting, and I had a hidden camera in a bag, and we were meeting with a big time smuggler of ivory in China, and had an interpreter. We were in central China, and the interpreter made the assumption that nobody in the room spoke English apart from us. And as we're having a conversation, posing as dealers, wanting to buy a large amount of ivory and shooting the whole transaction, the interpreter turned around and said, "Is the camera turned on yet?"
no.
Which was like, oh no. And it turned out the bodyguard of the dealer spoke perfect English.
Oh no.
It took some fast talking and a quick exit. And it's like, yeah, this is probably a numbers game. We can continue doing this. So it tends to be those sorts of situations. It's generally those, it's people rather than animals that I've found that, can create situations that, maybe are more dangerous.
Yeah, you're like, oh, please give me the bears.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, Connie Norman wanted to know what your favorite place to photograph on Cumberland Island. I'm butchering this question. What's your favorite place to photograph on Cumberland Island National Seashore?
I think the forest. I love the old growth, giant oak trees that are still there. A lot were cut down during the years, but there's still. I love searching the forest there for the big old trees. There's one particular tree which I take the group to each year, and naturalist there thinks that tree is probably 600 or 700 years old. It's a giant, giant live oak. So I think that those locations are the best, and you just imagine the history imagine if that tree could tell a story of what it's seen in the last 600 or 700 years. So the forests there are fabulous. So explore the forest when you go to visit.
All right, well, that is our time. Thank you so much again for taking the time to talk with us. Like, we really appreciate it, and people have been so excited to hear what you have to say.
No, well, my pleasure. Thanks very much for the invite.
All right, Facebook, I'm going to attempt to leave you. Oh, Ty, I totally forgot your advice.
See?